And welcome once again to another edition of the LOOR Entertainment Podcast. I am Andrew Southwick. With me once again is Jason Farley, LOOR executive. Man, it's great to see you again, Jason. How you doing?
Good to be here. Yeah. Oh, having a good time. It's rolling right along with life and just trying to not fall, just trying to keep the marbles on the track.
I guess so, man. Always a daily battle. How's things on the LOOR executive end? Like maybe give us a little update on some of the business stuff and how LOOR is growing from your inside baseball perspective.
Yeah. I mean, right now, what we're doing is putting all of our effort into finding another investor that gets the vision and understands what we're doing, and so that we can do marketing and blow up our marketing, and then just trying to find the people that are looking for the content that we've got. It's always an interesting thing when you finally get launched and you show people your content and they say, "Oh, wow, you guys have really great stuff," and say, "Okay, yeah, let's tell your friends and let's grow this thing." And so that's where we're at right now, is the let's grow this thing. And some people understand that it takes a village to get something marketed these days, and some people don't. But that's what we're trying to do is grow the audience so that we can grow the budgets for the filmmakers. Yeah,
it's interesting. The marketing, when you spend money on marketing, it's really difficult to know what marketing worked. I mean, there's little things you can do, but ultimately you're not really guessing necessarily, but you don't know which piece of marketing was most effective. And I just learned an interesting statistic. I don't know if you know this or not, but it used to be that in marketing and promotion, you needed to hit somebody 7 times before they really started to connect with you. And this was prior to social media and things like that. And you would think that with social media, it's a more direct link. Therefore, you would need fewer connections or fewer hit times because you can get to people directly. But actually, it's multiplied it. And now you got to touch somebody 27 times through all these different means, because everything is so customizable. And there are 8 zillion different social platforms, and not all of, there's the behemoths like Facebook and everything, but it's a Herculean task, what you are trying to do. What do you think is right now? What's an obstacle you're facing that is new in this journey?
Well, I think there's 2. One of them is getting people to invite their friends. And we're trying to figure out how to shift the marketing such that people are excited to jump in and be involved, invite their friends, because a big powerful part of the platform is the invite system. So if you invite somebody, then you get bonus loot, they get bonus loot. That's more loot into the system, and it also grows the overall weekly loot in the system. And so that's really the power, where the power is, in helping people see and understand that and be excited about that. I know, like, every app video game tells you, "Oh, invite your friends." And half the time I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm playing Golf Battle as much as I am, or whatever, so I don't want to invite my friends. But with LOOR, it's not the same sort of thing, because you're inviting them to a streaming platform that they get to help build. And because of that, my neighbor just across the street, just in the neighborhood, waved me down and said, "Hey, thanks so much for inviting me to this. This is really cool. I'm excited about what you guys are doing." And it wasn't it wasn't a burden to invite him, because I'm not trying to just get extra lives for Candy Crush. I'm trying to get movies made and build up an inheritance for the people that are coming after. So I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is help people see that the invite system is actually a blessing to your neighbor, and that it helps the filmmaker significantly. So, but we've had the Barely Biblical added got a new theme song with this great Japanese heavy metal Christian band. That was really exciting. And that band hired a new drummer, and that drummer just got saved, and they got to baptize the drummer. And, and now it feels like we were a part of this too, because they're here a part of Barely Biblical, part of the LOOR family, and they're out getting people saved. And, so there's all sorts of exciting things that it's fun to be a part of this kind of community. And so people are really blessed to be a part of it. And, it's just great Japanese heavy metal.
I don't know that I've ever heard Japanese heavy metal, and there's much the same way that I haven't heard. So I played with a drummer in my touring days, and he was really big into metal and all different kinds of strange and obscure metal. And I'm not kidding. He described to me once a Norwegian plaid lager metal. And I'm like, how niche do you have to get to notice that kind of difference? So, I mean, there's a lot of metal that I'm ignorant to, because it isn't my cup of tea, but that is unique and interesting. And I did read about the drummer being saved. So that's fantastic as well. But man, metal is an interesting genre, but I guess so are all genres anyway.
They are. And, they connect with different people, and Japanese, heavy metal is very passionate, whereas like German heavy metal is very math oriented and, very much engineering metal. And so it's fun to see different people groups that God made getting hold of the things.
I get that music is math. I mean, I'm a musician by trade. My craft is music. So I get that there is math in music. I get that. I'm not a math person. I think Satan invented math. But anyway, I've never heard of math metal. How is? Oh yeah. Are they like singing about the Pythagorean theorem or something? Like no. You got to educate me on this real quick.
So it'll be like, the song is in 7/8 for the verses and 5/8 for the chorus. That sort of thing. And so instead of thinking in terms of how does this song fit for people to dance to, which is why you use 3/4 and 4/4, because all the dances were either in 3/4 or 4/4. They say it would be cool to have a song in 9/8. It would be neat to have a song in 11/4. And then, so they and the folks that are really good at it, it can be really interesting, but it's very mental. It's not, it's because your body doesn't really like bump to 5/8. So
it's mental. All right, Jason, you're cool.
Whereas Japanese metal is very, is very passionate. I like Japanese metal a lot.
Right on. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. All I'm going to say is this: it sounds a little bit like jazz. And because you got all the crazy time signatures and wacky stuff and lots of things. I saw a meme once. It was fantastic. And it said, this is the difference between jazz musicians and rock musicians. Rock musicians play 3 chords to 3,000 people. Jazz musicians play 3,000 chords to 3 people. End of discussion.
Yeah,
so, that's fair. For those 3 people, I salute you. Anyway, all right, enough nonsense. Okay, let's get to a little piece of news here I thought was interesting. Jason, have you seen Shazam 2? I just saw it recently with my kids.
I haven't seen it, but my kids went to see it when it came out, and so I heard all about their response when they got home.
What did your kids think of it?
They said that they really liked the special effects and that the characters were fun, but the plot had too many twists and turns, and so it never felt like the story quite held together. But they weren't. It also was, they didn't feel like it was money that wasn't well spent when they went in the theaters, because it was big and explosive, and those things were fun.
All right. So I lost you there for a second, but if I gather what you said was they liked the special effects. They thought the story was weak, but it was still a good time and worth the experience. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. My kids thought it was better than the first one. They liked it a lot more. I always like origin stories. So usually the first ones for these are usually my favorite. I did think they took the Shazam character a little bit away from what the grounding that he was in the first, and that kind of made it suffer a little bit. But I enjoyed it. It was a good regular superhero movie that I think got lost in the swamp of all the woke backlash from Marvel and then the news that everything is being rebooted. Now, Zachary Levi plays the lead character in Shazam, and I want to bring this story to you, get your take on this here. Let me open this up. There we go. Oh, good. We've got a pop up. Perfect. Okay. Zachary Levi breaks out. Now back earlier this year, I want to say in March, Zachary Levi was ticked off that the initial reviews for Shazam 2 were so negative. So this is a follow-up from Screen Rant, and Zachary Levi breaks silence on negative Shazam 2 reviews after $133 million flop. It's amazing that we're to a point where hundreds of millions of dollars can still be considered a flop. I mean, I feel like if we could do that kind of business on LOOR, we're holding a parade,
right.
We're going to petition for a national day of honor, anyway, let's see. So basic summary, Fury of the Gods got negative reviews, underperformed at the box office, which I don't even know what that means anymore because the box office has changed. So what does it mean to underperform compared to pre-COVID? I don't think you can compare. But anyway, criticism, Zachary Levi believes it's a good film. Let me get to the piece. Zachary Levi talking about the negative reviews that only got $133 million. And part of the box office problems was what with the DC movie being one of the first of the year to underperform, it didn't even reach the original $367 million. Beyond its box office issues, it continued to get negative reviews. And then he says, I don't know, this is Zachary Levi, I don't know what the future holds for it all because unfortunately, the second movie was not well received. The audience score is still good, but the critic score was oddly and perplexingly low, and people were insanely unkind. I've been a part of things, and as much as I wish they were good, I know they were okay, and I know that they miss a lot of times. I'm not saying Shazam, Fear of the Gods is a perfect Orson Welles-like masterpiece, but it's a darn good movie, and effectively, I have no idea where we'll go from here. The article offers a few reasons why it might have had such a low Rotten Tomatoes score. It's one of the final movies in the DCEU with the franchise reboot coming up. And then the silly nature of the original did continue in part 2, but didn't really set itself apart from the first movie, not part 2, but part 1. Didn't set itself apart enough. And so most critics saw it as a step backwards or in other words, a lateral move. From what your daughters were telling you about this, about the show, what do you think is let me get this out of here. What do you think is the reason why Shazam might have petered out at the box office? And does Zachary Levi have a point? Hey, it's a good movie, but it's just getting lost in some of the mess.
I think, well, there's a couple of things. I think some of those Marvel movies set a really high standard for focused storytelling, and not every single Marvel movie did, but some of them really did. Captain America: Civil War, the first first Guardians of the Galaxy, and then the last couple of movies in that franchise, they set such a high standard for focused storytelling that now focused storytelling is seen as part of the best things. That when you've got a great superhero movie, it's because of the focused storytelling, right? That's what's now sets them apart. It used to be that good jokes and some great gags and stunts and a couple of good fight scenes made a great superhero movie. But unfortunately that genre has been elevated now beyond beyond just sort of the comic book movie to some really great scripts and screenplays in terms of focus in particular. So I think now, if you don't have focus in your superhero movie, DC used to make up for its lack of humor with earnestness. Shazam doesn't get that either, right? Wonder Woman was so earnest that it made up for the lack of jokes and, you know, all of that. And it gave a different feel, or DC always had that earnest emotional feel to it. Well, Shazam doesn't get that either. So I think that it ended up getting caught in the middle. And you know, that it was right when the DC universe was in so much turmoil too. So it probably didn't get the marketing that the other ones did.
So I have a theory, and this is a theory just from some of the other Hollywood reporting that has come out about Shazam 2, particularly at the time. And then with Black Adam, which was a complete faceplant. And I was really looking forward to that. I liked Dwayne Johnson. I liked The Rock, but that was terrible. But reports came out that he actually sabotaged Shazam 2 because the original idea was for him to be the villain in Shazam 2, and he didn't want that. He wanted Black Adam to face off Superman, so he decided to rewrite DCEU lore and canon in order to, I guess, give him a better platform for Black Adam. Now, if those reports have any shred of truth or accuracy to them, if you're writing a film and you're set up for Shazam versus Black Adam, which is the canon in the comics, and then all of a sudden he says, no, we're not going to do that. Now you've got to rewrite this movie that's already coming out. I don't see how that is going to meet or exceed any expectation when it gets submarined like that. What say you?
One of the most difficult things about Hollywood is that if you, unless you can fund your own film, you don't have any say over the final script. Everybody that has money gets to adjust the script when they put their money in. And so there's very few movies that make it out unscathed, unless you've got somebody who just funds their own movie. Like The Passion of the Christ was funded by Mel Gibson. And so there was one person that had say over the script, because there's only one person putting the money in. That lack of freedom in Hollywood is one of the things that makes so many movies at the end of the day feel disjointed. It's because somebody with money came along and said, hey, this is what's important to me. Here's the money. It comes with this string. And so by the end of it, you've got a bunch of different strings because it costs a lot of money to make a movie. So a bunch of different people put money in. A bunch of different strings end up attached to the script and are pulling it all in different directions. And so, now it's become really common that actors get a producer credit, a producer role, because their name is considered to be bringing in the money as well. And so that means that's one more string attached to the story to pull it in a different direction. And so it's really hard to stay focused when you've got strings pulling a bunch of different directions on a script, on a story. And that's because the Hollywood system is currently overrun by people with lots of different uses for Hollywood besides just telling a great story, right? That's a movie's primary goal is tell a great story. But what happens is people come in and they have uses for the great story and they want to turn it into propaganda. And so they bring their money in and they attach money to it. They attach a string to the story using their money so that it can be useful for whatever it is that they want it to be useful for. Most filmmakers want to just make a great movie.
And isn't that just more reason why LOOR is so necessary and needed? Because you don't have those strings. Imagine how many movies that have sucked that probably didn't suck when they were written and when they were pitched and halfway through production, until the suits come down and say, hey, we need aliens at the end of this movie. And all of a sudden we get Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
So, I mean, literally you're describing part of why LOOR exists and part of how LOOR is going to be a solution for some of the storytelling going forward.
Right. Yeah. Because the number of stories I've heard or been, there, and you have a producer say, well, does it need these references to God? Does it need this religious part? Right. And because they have lived a life or are trying to live a life completely separated from religion. I always find it fascinating to watch these high school movies and there's not a single Christian. It's like, that's not a real high school. That's an imaginary high school. Right.
Yeah.
Because the number of Christians that are out there, that every high school has a bunch of them in there, but you can somehow write a high school movie and there's never a Christian in it. This just doesn't make any sense. That's why, Freaks and Geeks, at least even though the Christian girl was kind of annoying, at least she was there and she was trying to get people to go to youth group with her. Like, well, that's because they're trying to be realistic. So I think that's where, every movie is a fantasy. It's somebody's fantasy. So, but the Hollywood is trying to imagine a world without religion, and it gets you some boring stories because the central heart of the human race is just removed before the storytelling gets to start. But you also just don't have the freedom for the artist who wants to tell stories well, because there are certain things that become off limits.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to ask one more question on this, and then, but the problem is what you just said is a really great segue to our next Pastor Reacts. As many of you will remember, we've done a couple of them now where we are looking at Hollywood films that take on either biblical stories, biblical ideas. They show God, they show Jesus. With Jason, you and I, we went through Bruce Almighty last time you were with us, and just did Oh God with George Burns with John Speed, the last one that we produced here. And today we're going to look at Prince of Egypt by DreamWorks, came out in 1998. And so that'll have some historical accuracy too. But before we get there, I want to ask you this. And I don't know, maybe, and this might be a little bit of a rebel question to ask right now because we might be giving people ideas. How do you think we could make Christian superhero movie? Because you realize the implications of that, because there is Jesus and he's not a superhero and he doesn't do his powers for superhero things, but we'd be kind of taking some of that and bending it around and making it, could Christians come up with an actual superhero and make it work? And I realize I've had Bible Man and God bless Willie Ames. I love Charles in Charge. And, that was fine. I'm sure God used it, did some good. But I mean like an actual superhero that doesn't exist in DC or Marvel that comes from us, that can be allegory or parallel or what have you. Can we do that and not be committing a theological faux pas?
Well, I'm not guaranteeing that there are no theological faux pas, but we do already have Hellboy, who is a baptized Christian who was raised in a Christian home. He was the biological child of Satan, and Hitler accidentally brought him through a portal, but a Christian adopted him and raised him in the faith. So we do have Hellboy.
I've never seen Hellboy.
You haven't? Oh, gosh, no. You should watch that one. That one, it's the only one where I know that the faith of the superhero is an important part of the story, that he's struggling between the identity that he got from his adopted father who raised him as a Christian and his biological father who was Satan. So it's a great movie.
Upon hearing that though, do I want to follow Satan or anybody else? To me, the answer is pretty simple, but then the movie would only be 2 minutes long.
It's true. So. But at the same time, how often do we make that decision wrong? How often do we think, I could do what I know is a lie right here, or I could follow God. And then we're like, going with the lie. So
you're right.
You're right. We do that. But in terms of theological accuracy, I don't think that Satan actually has a biological son and that will bring in the apocalypse. That's old. That's old. I think it's old Roman Catholic Apocrypha stuff. Mm-hmm. Not the Apocrypha of the Bible, the medieval Apocrypha about the apocalypse type of stuff. But it's an attempt at a Christian superhero. Now, the other thing that Tolkien talks about is that we as sub creators, so the reason we have so much fantasy right now is because of J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a very passionate Christian, who said we as sub creators underneath God can create worlds in which we can work through and he says when we're good at it, then the moral character, the ontological, the moral and metaphysical characteristics of the world stay the same, but there's all sorts of other things that we can change to tell stories, to work through different ideas and work through the discipleship of the imagination and using fantasy. And I do think that the superhero genre is a subcategory of fantasy in my mind. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's science fiction, but it's usually fantasy. And because of that, I do think that, something like The Lord of the Rings could be a good guide if we took that and said, what would a superhero version of this kind of storytelling work out? And I think you just have to learn to think deeply about the themes and the storytelling of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis in Narnia, and say what would this same storytelling, how would we work that out in the superhero genre? Because they were doing that with fantasy and fairyland, I guess you might say, trying to think deeply and say, how do we use that for Christian storytelling purposes? So I think that we should be doing that, trying to figure out how to do it. And if the first Christians that come along and do it and they don't do a great job at it, we should still cheer them on and say, hey, good try, let's improve, rather than what we often do, which is throw them into the dustbin of history and stomp on it.
Very well. Well, speaking of good tries and let's improve. Now, I remember 1998's Prince of Egypt by DreamWorks as being not the worst representation of a biblical story that I had ever seen. Now, at the time, I'm only 18 years old, and I really don't know a whole lot theologically. And also, again, 18-year-old male brain. So, take that with what you will. But we're going to look at that here. And so let me bring up the first scene for you. We're going to check this out. These will be in no particular order, though, just heads up. But I will try to go one at a time if I can here. Let me see. No, not that one. Let's see here. Parting. I want to find. See, now I had all these ordered. This is what happens. I had all these in order, in numerical order, and now they're out of numerical order. So when I go to look for the one I wanted for number one, I've got to go hover over each one to find the thing. There we go. All right. This is the beginning. Now, for those of you who don't know Prince of Egypt, it's a story of Moses. And Jeff Goldblum's one of the voices in it, plays Moses' brother Aaron, I think, if I remember correctly. And so we're going to walk through. I'll try to do it as chronologically as possible here. But we'll start out opening scene. Moses is going into the basket.
My baby, be still now, don't cry. Sleep as you're rocked by the stream. Sleep and remember my last lullaby. So I'll be with you when you dream.
So,
Man,
so
I forgot how good the music was in that movie.
Isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's really
that's
good.
DreamWorks, and we're in the dawning of the Pixar from Disney. So it's not like Disney's sloughing it at that time. And I thought that was a really strong showing from DreamWorks that seems to be a little bit underrated. Let's look at that just historically. As the story of Moses is portrayed in Scripture, where are they right and where are they wrong here?
Well, I'm not sure if there's any place I can think of where they're necessarily wrong. I think it is interesting the way water and crossing the waters and plays such a significant role throughout the books of Genesis and Exodus and in Joshua, and then in the New Testament with baptism, that kind of theme of God's people become his people through water over and over. And you've got Moses he's being established into the position he needs to be through the waters, just the way Noah was, and the way that then God's people will be later when the waters are parted for them and they go under and through the waters. So theologically, God is as a storyteller, he likes to charge up particular objects and make them meaningful. And this is one of the places where I think he charges up water and makes it meaningful, where he establishes his prophet into the place that it needs to be through the waters. And then, that's something that, and I do also appreciate that it's such a difficult trip through the waters that he doesn't just float calmly through the waters and then he gets to where he goes, but it looks like he might not make it half the time. And then he does. And it's the almost getting run over by a boat that finally pushes him into the right spot. That sounds a lot like my life. God wants me over here, so he's going to make it feel like I'm drowning, a kind of a Psalm 42. I'm under your waves and under your waterfalls, under your waters, Lord. I'm drowning over here. He's like, well, yeah, that's how I'm making you thirsty like a deer for my word.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a little, there's a little bit of license there, obviously, but, overall, not a bad way to get that started. Let's continue here. I hope this is the right clip. If it's not, I'll stop it early, but let's check this one out.
Gleaming in the moonlight, cool and clean and all I've ever known, all I ever wanted. Sweet perfumes of incense, graceful rooms of alabaster stone, all I ever wanted. This is my home, with my father, mother, brother, oh so noble, oh so strong. Now I am home, here among my trappings and belongings I belong. And if anybody doubts it, they couldn't be more wrong. I am a sovereign prince of Egypt, a son of the proud history that's shown, etched on every wall. Surely this is all I ever wanted, all I ever wanted, all I ever
All right, so they're showing Moses there as the Prince of Egypt, which that's the other thing that now in my old age I appreciate about this is that it did attempt to illustrate Moses had a life before he was called by God to lead the Israelites, and that is a part of what makes the story so incredible. And again, for people that don't know, you can really split up Moses' life into 40s. He was obviously put in the basket, sent down the river, picked up by Pharaoh's daughter, raises her own, Prince of Egypt. He gets mad, sees him killing a fellow Hebrew. He murders the Egyptian, and then he goes on the run. He's on the lam and hiding out in the wilderness. And that's where God calls him to then go back to Egypt and set his people free, so to speak. that was just just because for time we can't look at the whole thing. But in terms of the decadent life in Egypt and quote unquote Prince of Egypt and all that, though he wasn't quite Prince of Egypt, but nonetheless, what do you think of the portrayal there of what Moses' life would have been like in Egypt prior to his self-exile and then calling by God?
Yeah. Well, one of the inaccuracies is he's about 18 when in the Bible, he's 40 and he's about 18. And his older brother is about 20 at this point in the story, and they're causing all sorts of the kind of havoc that teenagers cause, and taking the car for a joyride type of thing, and that's what gets them. That's what gets him in trouble. Then that's how he learns that he's not really truly a prince of Egypt. One, that's not all in the Bible, but he's also 40 years old. Mm-hmm. And so he would have, so by the time that he goes into exile, he's already married. He's not a teenager, because they go back later to go get his wife, his first wife, who goes with him, gladly goes with him. So so that's an inaccuracy historically. And then he's 80 years old when he actually brings them through the Red Sea and all of that. So because Zipporah, who he marries later, is his second wife. So he marries when he's out in the wilderness a second time. And then once they go through the Red Sea, then they rescue his first wife. So that's an inaccuracy but I understand why they made the change, because it's hard for us to imagine and identify with an 80-year-old as the hero. So especially then understanding that he's 120 when they finally get to the edge of the promised land, because we don't understand things, or our imagination's too thin to imagine a 120-year-old still leading them around. So that's an inaccuracy. I do think that that scripturally it just says he sees an Egyptian abusing a Hebrew and murders him and kills him. So in the story, if I remember right, he kills him accidentally, but it makes it clear that he kills him on purpose. And it seems like in Moses's mind that he thinks it's time to rescue his people. And so maybe he always knew that he was a Hebrew. It doesn't seem as if he was unaware that he's somehow surprised. Why
would you have that kind of rage for that kind of injustice? I mean, I guess you could be, well, I have a heart for the downtrodden, but it seems to be quite a visceral reaction, one you would have for family to do that. And so if that's the case, biblically, I'm speaking of the biblical account. Yeah. He would have, I think it's safe to surmise from the available evidence that he knew where he came from.
He knew where he came from, and he was raised by his own mom. If you remember in the story, he was raised by his own mother, but that he still had access to the palace. So because he was also a part of. So he was just a man in both worlds. And when he stopped being a man in both worlds is not exactly clear, but it is clear that he that he attacks the Egyptian thinking he's going to rescue his people, and they reject him. Mm-hmm. Right? He shows up and they say no. And then he goes off for 40 years into the wilderness and comes back, the prophet that they need, and is able to, but with a stutter and then his brother speaks on his behalf. And those things, are interesting. Those things are important for the Christological, understanding of Moses as a type of Jesus in the Old Testament. And so some of those things get left out because that's not the thing that they focus on. And you got to focus on something. So they end up focusing on, they keep him a little younger, a little more handsome. The older you get, the less, the less attractive the less attractive you are on screen. So,
let's go ahead.
So, but the some of the Christological aspects get left out because of that.
Well, let's go ahead. We're going to look at just a couple more scenes here, then we'll wrap up. But let's look at a couple of the highlights, some of the stuff that a lot of people will know or at least have vaguely heard about. Here's where they illustrate the 10 plagues, or the plagues, I should say.
Once I thought the chance to make you laugh was all I ever wanted. And even now, I wish that God had chose another. Serving as your foe on his behalf is the last thing that I wanted. This was my home. All this pain and devastation, how it tortures me inside. All the innocent who suffer from your stubbornness and pride. You I called brother, why must you call down another blow?
So then you have a little bit of that. Some of the plagues there seen in made for a nice little musical number. I bet Moses wasn't dreaming of that at that time. Your thoughts on that account? Obviously, there's a lot they left out in how the plagues actually happened. But go ahead.
Right, and this is sort of the what you might call the fun and games part of the movie, where they have to move through time fairly quickly and build the tension and show why it is that things come to the black moment at the end. But what they leave out that is the religious aspects of the plague, because there were 10 gods in Egypt that each had a different role, and each of those gods gets one of the plagues, with the last god being the Pharaoh himself, who was supposed to be the incarnation of a god. His son being killed is the 10th god in the pantheon to receive a plague. And that's the one that finally gets them to let the people go. So they turn it almost, and the story has this undertone of kind of the human freedom, the human freedom is good and the slavery is bad, and which is true. That's all scriptural. But it's not the freedom goes deeper than that in the Exodus story. Because the story starts with, this is, after Joseph had a significant effect on the entire nation of Egypt by telling them about the creator God who they can come to and find forgiveness. And there's, I think, a good argument that a lot of the Egyptians had gotten saved and became a part, had gone through circumcision and all of that in order to become a part of the people, but then they forgot. Right. That a few generations later, they had forgotten, or 230 years or something. They had forgotten that they had converted. Their grandkids, their great grandkids no longer were serving the creator. And so they had gone back to the pantheon. And so the creator shows up and says, I'm going to crush the pantheon and take my people away because you have turned away from me. So I think that's what that religious aspect is missing. And they turn it into kind of a human freedom story, a political freedom story, maybe we would even say, rather than a freedom of a religious, spiritual freedom from sin and guilt and condemnation that results in the external freedoms, the internal freedoms that lead to the external freedoms. Although it takes a generation as well, because
the first generation did not make it to the promised land. Neither did Moses. They all died. It was the second generation, Joshua and Caleb, got there. That's a spoiler alert, in case you're wondering. But I would say this, that is an interesting parallel to the way the Jews were in Jesus' day, expecting freedom from Roman occupation, expecting political freedom, a human freedom, not realizing the spiritual freedom that underpins the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think that's the conservative movement in our day. We forget that getting political freedom in order to run out our spiritual bondage actually isn't a blessing. We need the spiritual freedom to undergird and to precede the political freedom that we should want as well. But it's not the end in and of itself. It's the end is the spiritual freedom, and the political freedom is a bonus that flows from it.
All right. Well, Jason, you've given a little extra time here. Let's wrap this movie up. I got two quick elements, two quick scenes to wrap up the story, and we'll wrap up the show. Thanks for a little bit of extra time today. Let's move ahead. This is, of course, the parting of the Red Sea. right across. Go ahead.
Right. And I mean, I love that they just went straight supernatural, the power of God, the quote from the Bible, all of those things are fantastic. And also Aaron going first makes sense because he hasn't been ordained the high priest yet, but he's the going to be the high priest. And so that is a great story choice for him to be the one that says, hey, I'll lead the way because he's towards God, because that's what he does with the rest of his life. And then the mixture of Hebrews and Egyptians, that come out the other side, all one people, is another, I think, important part of what's going on in Exodus, because there's a lot of Egyptians that did go with the Hebrews that said, oh, well, we want that God for our God. We're coming with you. And so, there's a lot really good in that scene. And I know technologically that was a major step forward with the waves in the animation, and then the water and all of that's really hard to animate. And they made a big technological leap forward with that scene. So it's a pretty amazing scene.
All right. Well, we are just about out of time here. So let's get your evaluation of the Prince of Egypt. Let's first start with theological accuracy. We'll go 1 to 10. Where do you fall on the scale? 1 being no good, 10 being that was basically word for word from, I guess a combination of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in that 7.5 to 8 range.
Okay.
They do a really good job. I mean, I haven't watched it for about 10 years, but I watched it with my kids when they were younger, and I remember thinking, as I was a little bit older, thinking, wow, they got so much of this story right.
Yeah.
Surprisingly right. Versus the new Noah, where you think, where did you get this idea?
Yeah, what I like about this movie is that they didn't do a whole lot to try to quote unquote improve the story. That's what I think Noah did. It was they tried to make this whole new drama and action thriller, and actually it's pretty incredible the way it was. Tell that story, but not even because I'm a Christian and that's the truth, but that's actually the Bible story is a better story, just objectively. Right. Better than rock people falling out of the sky. I mean, but anyway, that's a whole nother movie, which we will cover on a future episode of Pastor Reacts, but it's not today.
Yeah. Right. And I remember they came back and tried to do Joseph King of Dreams next and had a harder time being accurate, because I think there's less information. It was for that one. But the big places where they don't quite get it are the places where we read back into it what we're concerned about back to the Exodus story, whereas the idolatry was the major. We're told that the reason that the slavery was bad and getting worse was the idolatry of the people, and not just that you had a slave master who just liked having slaves, and that there was actually because the God's people began to worship other gods, the slavery, they became slaves. The slavery was getting worse and worse, and so that's the thing that I think gets left out that keeps it from an 8.5 or a 9 is that it wasn't a case of the good guys getting saved from the bad guys. It was a case of the God's people falling into idolatry, and so they ended up slaves. And then God came and rescued them first from their slavery so that he could take them into the wilderness and teach them how to worship, which is what Moses says when he gets there. God wants me to take them out and teach and remind them how to worship properly. And he says, no. And he says, well, that is happening. That's what's going to happen. So it can happen willingly or not. But had they learned how to worship properly, they would have made it out of slavery. And I think maybe been able to convert the Egyptians and return to the to their promised land without all of the destruction. But resisting the Lord always ends up in the, trying to hold something back from God always ends up in broken fingers. So
it is the humorous image as a parent thinking of God calling Moses, go set my people free, and him saying no 5 times, which is what he did. And God effectively saying in God speak, the way we would say, okay, I'm not really asking you to do this. Yeah. I'm asking you as a courtesy, but I'm telling you.
You're right.
You're good.
By would you please, I meant thou shalt.
Yeah. So just in case you're wondering. All right. How about historical accuracy? Same scale, 1 to 10?
The time they shorten up the timeline, which I think is a problem. I also think that it was a different Pharaoh than the one that they choose, Ramesses. So because they put it in a different era of Egyptian history than I think the Bible does. So I think that's a problem. And then I think they leave out the how religious everybody would have been, and I think that's a historical inaccuracy. They secularize the people groups a lot on both sides. Everybody ends up much more secular. And I remember watching a movie not too long ago that they tried to be more accurate about the Egyptian religions of the ancient world, and it was almost impossible to connect with any of the characters after watching it. And so I understand why they do that. You can't get too far away from people's experience if they're going to connect. But people, we living in a secularized age, or an attempted a secularized age, our religious convictions, we call them something else, and so they get invisible to us, and so it's hard to imagine how religious they would have been in Egypt and in the ancient world. So that's another historical inaccuracy that I remember watching it thinking, where are all the temples and the animal sacrifices and all the things that would be a regular part of life? They leave that out because if we would call our own cultural morality religion, which it is, then we would realize how religious we are today as a culture. And then there would be that parallel. You'd be able to do it. But because we don't call it religion, and as you said, it becomes invisible to us, we think that we're somehow actually like truly secular, as in religious. Right. But that's not the case. All right. Yeah. Last question. How about entertainment value? 1 to 10. Oh, this is the music from it is still on some of the playlists that my family listens to regularly. The music's really great. They use some really great sort of the operatic chorus in the music really well. And I can't think of another movie that does that. And so I love that aspect of it. The animation's incredible as well. And so I think that, and then the acting's good and the storytelling's good. And, it's a moving story, the way they tell it, even with the thing they leave out, you end up with an incredibly moving story that uses some really good, you walk away with, I think, some really great characters and images and all sorts of things. So I think it's an incredibly entertaining movie.
Well, there you have it, straight from Mr. Jason Farley, LOOR executive, Prince of Egypt. If you haven't seen it, it's worth dusting off the, going into the archives and checking it out, or renting it on Amazon or what have you. A fairly good, for Hollywood and what they are, a fairly good biblical story coming out of Hollywood. Not saying, again, maybe not necessarily Sunday school fodder, but a good telling nonetheless. Jason, hey, thanks for the time today. Really appreciate your extra time here on this episode.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, for Jason Farley, I'm Andrew Southwick. This has been the LOOR Entertainment Podcast. Thank you for watching. Remember, what do you think about Prince of Egypt? Leave your comments in the comment section. Are there other movies you want us to cover? Let us know there too. And we will see you next time.